Hello, welcome to this AVLAND review of the Denon AVR3313. We're going to talk to you about the features of this AV receiver, its sound quality, how to set it up, as well as show you its on-screen menus and network streaming.
So this is the new mid-priced AV receiver from Denon, the AVR3313. It's got a few models below it and a few models above it in the range. It's got 7 channels of amplification, which is rated at 125 watts RMS. And when you get up to this level, you get an aluminium front panel. All the ones below this have a plastic front panel. So the build quality on it's a lot better than the cheaper ones, and certainly better than last year's model as well, the 3312, where it wasn't as good. It was plastic fronted, whereas this is metal. Now, one of the main features that this has got at the price point that pretty much everything else lacks, and I think it was the first one to have this too, is it has a Zone 2 HDMI output. So as well as having twin outputs for a projector and a flat panel TV, it has another one for another room. So if you've got another zone, you can run that. You can see here on the front panel as well, it also has a HDMI input at the front. It's got 7 HDMI inputs in total, and that includes that one on the front there. There's also a USB input on the front, which you can plug an iPad or an iPod or a USB flash stick into to play music back from. It will also, you can use the remote control of the Denon to navigate what's on your iPod or iPad. It also comes with Apple Airplay, so if you've got this on your network, you can wirelessly play music straight back from either your computer or your iPod or iPad. It also has Denon A, so you can do it the other way around. You can share music on your computer or using a NAS drive and play it back that way around. So you can actually use the on-screen menus of this to play back the music. We'll show you a bit how to do that later on in the review. At the rear panel, it's got a fair few connections, but they're slowly but surely doing away with the older analog connections. So you can see here it has a 12-watt trigger outputs, which is useful for a projector, an RS-332 connection for custom installation, a network connection, 2 coaxial digital inputs and 2 optical ones, which can be assigned to different things. Denon Link HD, which we'll tell you about a bit more in a bit about that, and these sort of older analog connections component. It still has a component output as well, which can be switched to being a monitor output or the Zone 2. There's the all-important Zone 2 HDMI output, along with the 6 inputs and 2 outputs for Zone 1, so in the main room. And that Zone 2 will work independently. So in the main room, you could be watching a Blu-ray, say, and then if you had your satellite receiver plugged in, you could be watching that in the second room. And if you use the control application on it, you can use it to control that second zone's volume and what input you want in that. Now this is the Denon Link HD. And what happens actually is it still sends the sound down the HDMI cable. But what the Denon Link HD does is it locks the clocks between the actual Blu-ray player, the 3313 Blu-ray player that you can see here, and the amp. So it's only using one of the clocks. And this drastically reduces jitter.
Now we're going to show you under the lid of the Denon AVR3313 and show you the components that are inside it.
So here's under the lid of the 3313. That main board is the main video switching and audio processing board, and it's very densely populated. It's all surface mount, and pretty much is the brains of the unit. That does most of the work, and then there are more boards below that take in the analog inputs, and then also the outputs to the actual speakers. And then right down the middle there, that's where all the actual amplification modules are. There's 7 of them. And Denon have improved the sound quality this year on this model, and improved the quality of the actual transistors and the op amps that actually do the actual amplifying. They've been improved. There's now more of them per channel. I think there's 2 per channel. So it's better sound quality, and it is noticeable. There is a big leap up from last year's model. Not just the build quality that's better, as you said, with the aluminium front panel, but the sound quality is significantly better too. and they've sort of repeated that across the whole range, so they've really sort of stepped it up a bit. And the sound is notably, it's bit more powerful in the sound. It's more defined, not quite as bright as it was last year. A bit of a warmer sound, but still that sort of detail in the higher range, higher frequencies that you'd expect from Denon. Now these are the menus. These are overlaid onto the video, which we're just running some video through to show you, because unless you've got a video signal going through it, not all of the controls are accessible. They're greyed out. Here's the audio controls here. You've got tone controls, if you just want a sort of basic tone controls. Shouldn't need that. If you've got well-matched speakers for the amplifier, you shouldn't need to play around with the bass and treble. You can adjust the audio delay. If it's slightly out of sync, the pictures with the sound, that can be adjusted here in 1 millisecond steps up and down. It goes up to 200 milliseconds. You've got the volume control here. You can limit it to a certain limit, and you can also change the scale, whether it counts down in -dB or up in numbers. 0 dB is full power. It's the same on most AV amps. That is full power. If you go beyond that, you could damage the amplifier or the receiver or your speakers. So we recommend keep it to 0 dB. You can change the mute level as well, whether it's completely muted or only goes down to just being quiet. Here's the different things for the Odyssey setup. You can tell it with Odyssey DSX, how you're using that, if you're going to use Odyssey DSX, whether you've got front wide or speakers connected or not. To the video settings, in the picture adjust menu, you can adjust things like the contrast and brightness. And it shows you, what's going on the screen. You shouldn't have to do this, and normally you do this on your display device. You do it on your projector or your flat screen TV. I'd recommend just leaving this just switched off and just not using it at all. In the HDMI setup, you can there's an auto lip sync feature, and you can set whether you want the HDMI output to be whether it's from the sounds coming from the receiver or whether it's coming through the television. You can also select whether you want both HDMI outputs on or just the one. If you're having some problems with the HDMI and you're not using both outputs, it's worth just switching it to the one you're using. You can switch the HDMI control on and off, so you can get it to control sort of basic functions of another device that's connected by HDMI. Here's some different sort of video modes. Again, I wouldn't play with those, I'd just leave it. You can switch the scaler on and off, and change the resolution you want it to output that closely marries up with what your screen is, or just leave it on auto. If you're coming in from Blu-ray, you shouldn't need to, and you've got a 1080p screen, you should just be able to just leave the scaler off. You shouldn't need it scaling at all. Here's where you can see where the volume display, when you go up and down the volume, it will show you that on the on-screen graphics. You can have it at the top or the bottom. Here's where you want it to tell you information. How long you want it actually to be displayed for, so 30 seconds. The TV format for your television. In Europe it's PAL, in the United States it'd be NTSC. Here's where you can send the different inputs, so if you want to assign which one you want the Denon Link on, which one you want optical, coaxial, whether you want it to be HDMI or not, whether you want it to be one of the analog inputs, that can all be done here. This is useful if you want to rename them, so if you want something like PlayStation or Xbox or Sky Satellite, you can rename it to that here. Useful, if you don't want, if people who aren't familiar with the amp, if they want to be able to find what's on there. You can hide sources as well. The dial that's on the front. If you're only using Blu-ray and say satellite, you can hide all the rest, so it just flips between those two. It makes it a lot easier again if someone's not familiar with the amp, what's connected to it. Here you can change the different levels on the different inputs, the different analog and digital inputs, what level they're at. If you've got a big difference between the two, so your satellite's very quiet compared to Blu-ray, you can adjust that. You can switch here the different input modes, and whether it's I'd just leave that on auto. It should work fine on auto, but it's there. You can override it if you want to. Here's where you can change the, which video per input you want on, which video source. To the speaker setup, in the manual setup here, you can assign the different amps in a variety of different ways. So if you're using 7.1, you have them on main. If you're using zone 2, you can have the zone 2 powered or zone 3 powered. You can have zone 1 and zone 2 and 3 mono, or you can have just 2 channel. You can have a front B, and then main only is assuming you're going to use it for 7.1. But you can also biamp the front speakers as well, and if you're not using those extra 6th and 7th channels, you can improve the sound quality by having it on biamp. In the speaker config, you can select whether you want large or small speakers, and this is really if you've got satellite, a subsat package with very small speakers, have it to small. But I'd say if you've got more conventional sized speakers, have it on large. And certainly if you've got floor standing speakers, have it on large. Here's where you set up the subwoofer. You can put more bass through the fronts, or you can have the LFE just go into the sub. Most setups, that's the best option, unless you've got a particularly small sub and big floor standing speakers. I don't see a reason why you'd have it any different to that. You can also set the frequency up of the subwoofer you want it to cut off at and send those frequencies to the sub. Here's where you set up the distance between the speakers, so just a tape measure will do that. And the levels, you can do it by ear. Most people, it's not a problem, but if you want it more accurately, you can use a sound pressure level meter. A lot of mobile phones now have that built in as well. This is where you tell it what the crossover networks in the speakers, what they cut off at. Again, helps the decide what's going to the subwoofer. Here you can decide with 2-channel playback how you want it to work, whether you want the sub on or not. Or you just have it on auto. If you've got good floor standing speakers, there's no point having the sub on as well with music. It's generally going to sound better through just those, if it's just stereo music. Here's the networking information, and here you can manually set the IP address. This is very important if you're using the control app. You want the IP control switched on, otherwise you won't be able to turn the amp back on again. You can edit the network name as well of the receiver. You can change it to something else, but I'd leave it as AVR3313 is best. Here's where you can manually set the IP address. If you're having any problems, we always recommend doing that with networking. Just manually set up the IP address. Also makes it easier to find for some of the apps out there, control applications. If you've got a static IP address, it's more likely to find it again quicker. Here is the general setup menu. You can change things like the language of the menus. You can see it comes with quite a few different ones in there. And the different zones, you can change a few different things here. You've got bass and treble controls. You can change the channel level, so if the speakers aren't equally in the room, you can change it to mono as well. And you could have a fixed volume level as well if you want, but generally you're going to want to be able to change that. You've got exactly the same thing for the zone 3 output as well, and you can rename the zone, so you might want kitchen, bedroom, something like that, to make it more familiar to find. And you can use, even if you're using a 7-channel, you could use those second and third zones. You just need to add either active speakers or a power amp to the unit to power those extra speakers. It will switch into, you can have an auto standby setting there as well. If it doesn't detect an input, it'll turn itself off. You can also dim the front display or turn the front display off completely. You can select whether the channeling indicators that are on the front of the display show what's coming in or which speakers are going on, what's going through the output. So if it was a Pro Logic input with just stereo, it would show 2 speakers, but of course if you switched output, it will then show however many speakers you've got, 5 or 7.1. It shows you what input and resolution you've got going out to the different monitor outputs. It's quite useful if you're trying to fault find, try and discover if you've got a problem or an issue on your cabling or your display device. And you can see how it's set up here with what HDMI input, what audio source. And you can also see what firmware version, and you can update that as well. It will. You've got different options. You can see if there's an update, but it will also tell you if there is one as well. If it's connected to a network, it will ask you if you want to do an update when there is one. You can see here this unit we've reviewed has got the latest firmware on, so there's no need to try and do an update on it. You can also lock the setup so no one can play around with it, which is quite useful too. Now this is the Android application. It's very similar to the Apple iOS application as well. And this is where you can play music, DLNA. You can choose what you want to play. You can control the volume for different zones, and which input you want to switch between. So here you can set the max volume for different zones as well and things like that. You can also edit the buttons, which is quite useful on this app. So you can change if you're not using something. So you're not using, say, satellite input. You could get rid of it and replace it with something else. These units now have Spotify on as well. So, for instance, if you're using Spotify, you could change it to that, and that will then appear on the home screen, and make it a nice, quick, shortcut. And you could do the same for all those different options in there. So it's customizable. The problem I have with it is that it's not. We're using it here on a tablet, and it's designed for a phone. Really, they should produce two versions, or the version should know whether it's on a tablet or whether it's on a phone, and show you a different version of the application, because you could have a lot more controls on here and not have to keep flicking between different screens. Unfortunately, this is the same on all the different applications currently available. You constantly have to flick. I mean, for instance, the sound mode here, it's opening up, could just be a toggle button on the main screen, but instead you have to go into the screen and change it to which sound mode you want. It's just an extra step, and it's unnecessary. You wouldn't want a remote control that was like this, so I don't know why you'd want an app that does it either. At least they've put the volume at the bottom. That's quite useful. You can quickly change the volume. But I'd prefer to have more on the home screen, more buttons, when you're using it with a tablet, which I think at this price level most people are going to be doing that. And then maybe a separate app for I can understand maybe in a second zone you'd want the basic controls on something like a phone or a smaller form factor, but not on a tablet. You want more buttons and more controls. So hopefully in time that will come. Here's where you switch to the media streaming, and you can select then what you want to do. You can see it's a little bit unresponsive. It's not always the quickest at responding to what you want to do. It isn't very intuitive either, I find, to actually go between the different inputs. It doesn't always respond to what you want to do. So here I'm clicking on it, but it's only now just switched over to Media Player. And then we found while we were testing it, when we went to go to Media Player to actually find, you can see there we've got a NAS drive that's DLNA compliant. It does take a bit of a while to get going and actually go into the different ones. So I'm going to try and play some FLAC on it. This won't do 192. This will only do 96 kilohertz at the moment. Playback. You can see it here. Eventually, once it's up and running, you can use it okay. And it brings the album art as well across if the DLNA server's up to doing that. Unfortunately, the DLNA servers on the market, there's lots of different ones. They don't always do things. So FLAC support isn't universal. Being able to browse by folder so you can play WAV files isn't universal either. So unless you've got the right DLNA server, you might not be able to play lossless formats. So that's slightly annoying, but here you can see we've got it to play a WAV file fine. And again, bring in the album art, but it does depend heavily on the the make of NAS drive or DLNA software you've got running on your computer. This is the zone control. So again, I would prefer it if you could just tell it, I'm using this device as a zone 2, and it just showed you zone 2 controls. It didn't show you them all at the same time. It's a bit long-winded to go into. If you've got a tablet, say, in the zone 2, you shouldn't have to keep going in and out of windows. But hopefully in time, these things will change. Now, onto the pros and cons of the 3313. Good build quality, much of an improvement over last year's models. The Denon Link, Denon Link HD is a brilliant feature, and not all manufacturers have this kind of link between their Blu-ray players and the amp. That works very, very well. The sound quality in this is much improved. Build quality is improved, as I said. Aluminium front panel, and it's quite good as well because it's not very deep. Quite a lot of receivers at this sort of price are quite deep. Actual box. So if you're limited for space, this is probably the shallowest of all the ones on the market at this price point. The Zone 2 HDMI output as well is a brilliant feature if you've got a television in a bedroom and you can run a HDMI cable to it. It's not too far away. You can share all the devices you've got hooked up to the Denon in that second zone and still get really good picture quality out the end, and it will carry the sound as well. The other thing it will also do down that Zone 2 output, which we found in testing, was you could actually have another AV receiver. So if you've maybe got an older one or a cheaper AV receiver, it will output full 5.1, 7.1 from a Blu-ray player or other sources for that matter down that HDMI, down the Zone 2 HDMI. So you could have two home cinema systems but have all the sources shared in one place. So if you've got a really good Blu-ray player like the matching DBT3313 UD that goes with this, you could have that use it in another room with another home cinema system just by running that HDMI cable to that room. So we were really impressed with that. The Zone 2 functionality is very useful, or it can just go to a television. On the con side, some people might find this amp a little bit lightweight on the bass, but it's got the detail, it's got the clarity there, which you come to expect from Denon. It has a very impressive feature set. It doesn't have Odyssey XT32. That's the other thing, that there are other ones on the market. The Onkyo one at the same price, actually slightly cheaper here in the UK, does have that. But if you're not bothered about Odyssey XT32, if you want Apple Airplay, this is probably the receiver at this sort of price point to go for.
That's the end of our review of the Denon AVR3313. If you'd like to see more video reviews, see more information about this AV receiver, or you'd like to purchase it, please visit our website avland.co.uk. Thank you for watching.